An intern?
Fabian repeated in disbelief.
Didn't you just tell me that none of you could handle the surgery because the procedure is too complicated? And now you're telling me an intern is carrying out the operation?
The doctor was sweating profusely. He didn't know how to answer.
Zach's a traditional medicine specialist,
Nancy added unhelpfully.
What?
Anger swelled up within Fabian's chest, and his eyes flashed. He was in enough trouble because he had gotten Vanessa into the accident in the first place. Now they were telling him that an intern was operating on her. It was absolutely unacceptable.
I'll hold you all responsible. If anything happens to Vanessa.
The fury was clear on Fabian's face as he spat out the words. Nancy pleaded instinctively.
It's not my fault. I tried to stop him, but I couldn't. He wouldn't listen to me.
What's going on?
A stern voice interrupted Nancy as she was trying to defend herself. Everybody looked back along the corridor to where the voice had come from. A rounded man walked unsteadily toward them, preceded by a whiff of alcohol.
Dr. Williams,
Nancy exclaimed. The medical staff hurried over to greet him, and they quickly explained the situation. Caleb frowned as he listened.
The patient is clearly suffering a hemorrhage and needs a craniotomy. We don't have the appropriate equipment, so I'm afraid that it would be difficult for us to carry out this surgery. If I were to operate on her, I would have less than a 40% chance of success.
What do you mean?
Fabian asked. Caleb turned to stare at the young man who had dared interrupt him.
Dr. Williams, this is Fabian, one of the Hunter family. You know, as in the Hunter group. The patient is his friend.
The junior doctor hurriedly explained. Caleb had a moment of pure panic when he heard the Hunter group being mentioned. He tried to clear his mind and dispel the effects of the alcohol as he quickly attempted to figure out a solution. In normal circumstances, he would have proceeded with the operation anyway, even if the chances of success weren't high. If there were any problems arising from the surgery, no one would question his actions at the hospital. However, the patient was a friend of the Hunter family, which made a big difference. It was hard to tell whether the operation would succeed. He knew he would also be in trouble if any adverse effects arose following the operation. As he was thinking about it, Caleb dismissed the idea of surgery. He considered it too risky and was unwilling to bear the consequences if anything went wrong. He said to Fabian,
Mr. Hunter, your friend's condition requires a complex procedure. Our hospital doesn't have the necessary equipment to perform this surgery. I would suggest that we transfer the patient to another hospital. Nancy here will make the necessary arrangements for you.
I've been waiting for you for over half an hour while Vanessa's life is in danger. And now you tell me she needs to be transferred to another hospital.
Fabian asked angrily, and then he grabbed Caleb by the collar. Caleb gave a wry smile as he explained.
Mr. Hunter, it's not that I don't want to operate on the patient. It's just that the risk of surgery is too high. I'm less than 40% confident of a successful outcome. If I operate without specialist equipment, it's too great a risk.
Someone next to him murmured,
Dr. Williams, the operation has actually begun.
What do you mean?
Caleb asked.
Who's carrying out the procedure?
There was a weighty pause. It's Zach. Caleb suddenly sobered up completely. He shouted angrily.
What the hell? Who allowed him to operate on the patient?
Everyone was silent. At that moment, the door of the operating room was pushed open and Zach walked out. Looking at the group of people gathered outside the room, he said,
The operation is complete. Most of the blood resulting from the internal bleeding in the patient's brain has been removed. It's vital that she isn't moved. Try to keep her comfortable, and she'll make a full recovery once the remaining blood has drained out.
Caleb stepped forward and glared at Zach. He prodded him in the chest with one finger and asked in an ominously quiet voice,
Who asked you to perform this operation? Who gave you permission to do it? Are you ready to take full responsibility if anything goes wrong? It's not only you who'll get into trouble, but the good reputation of my hospital will also be affected.
The doctor was furious, but much of his anger stemmed from the knowledge that in reality, he would be the one to bear the responsibility if anything went wrong. After all, he was supposed to be on call and should have attended sooner to handle the situation. Zach frowned in disgust. As the herbal king, he had always prioritized saving people's lives. It seemed that in this era, medical staff would always put accountability first. They would push the patients away when they were scared of being held responsible. He found their medical ethics appalling.
Don't worry. The patient will be fine now. I'll bear full responsibility if anything goes wrong,
He said coldly. Caleb sneered at him.
You think the patient's really okay now? Tell me, how is that possible? There was bleeding on the brain. She needs a craniotomy, and we don't have the equipment for that. But you, an intern, think you've managed to solve the problem.
Zach didn't deign to reply. He just walked away. He needed a good rest. It had taken a lot of his energy to perform the 9 spikes procedure. Fabian stood in front of Zach, blocking his way. He said disdainfully,
Do you even know who the patient is? I can assure you that you'll end up in prison for the rest of your life, if anything goes wrong.
Zach's face darkened. As the herbal king, many people from all walks of life had sought treatment from him. However, this guy was talking to him as if he were a nobody.
I treat my patients equally, regardless of their social status. I would have done exactly the same for anybody who needed help.
He said,
Is that so? Can you afford to take responsibility if anything happens to her?
Fabian demanded as he glared at Zach. Then he turned to Caleb and said,
I don't want to see this person anymore. Tell him to leave the hospital immediately.
Caleb nodded vigorously and turned to Zach.
Pack your stuff and get out of here!
He instructed.
I've cured the patient. Also, my internship in this hospital isn't complete yet. How can you ask me to leave? That's not in line with the hospital's rules.
Zach replied indifferently.
Rules!
Caleb roared.
I'll give you rules. You carried out an operation without permission. That was against the rules. How dare you still talk about your internship? You're lucky that you're not being thrown off your course entirely. Get out of here now!